West Africa, you have two countries, Liberia and Sierra Leone. And in these countries, you have the Americo-Liberians and the Creole people. These are people that were essentially repatriated back to the African continent after having been enslaved in the Americas. The Liberian ones predominantly came from the USA, and the Sierra Leonean ones predominantly came from British overseas territories in the Caribbean. After having resettled in the African lands, they set up their own societies and governments, and eventually came up with their own Creole languages based off of English. And it's interesting because, like, even though they were a minority in their countries, they became the ruling class, which also caused some internal conflicts over time with the native Africans that were in those areas. But yeah, it's just an interesting story about post-colonial repatriated former enslaved peoples that go back to the African continent and create a whole new culture and society and language for themselves. Next up, the Zanzibar Islands. So you gotta understand, like, Zanzibar is like a whole other thing from Tanzania, even though they unified in the 60s, like Tanzania, Zanzibar, that's why it's called Tanzania. But like, the Zanzibar Islands are basically the hub of the East African operations of the Omani Sultanate. So this place was like the core where all of the Arab and Persian and Indian sailors would come to trade and do whatever. So eventually, over time, they mixed in with the East African Bantu population. And to this day, Zanzibari people have a completely separate culture and thing going on from the rest of Tanzania and East Africa. Of course, they speak Swahili, but even the Swahili language is heavily Arabic derived. Like, its estimates say like about a third of the Swahili language is Arabic. So yeah, Zanzibar. And speaking of islands, if you look at all the insular regions of Africa, the countries, Cape Verde, Sao Tome and Principe, Comoros, Mauritius, and Seychelles, four of them, excluding Comoros, were uninhabited prior to European discovery. So some people argue that these actually are legitimately European discoveries. So that meant, besides the European